Well, thank you very much, and it's absolutely wonderful to be here. And of course, my greatest gratitude also goes to Mary, who's been a wonderful friend for almost 15 years now. Now, everything has been said about Telos, but not by everyone. So I will add to what my colleagues who've gone before me have already mentioned. I think it's very much the case that Telos isn't about a rereading of history or simply an application of theory to some contemporary phenomena. It's much more than that. And in fact, I would go as far as saying that it's been on the right side of history, just as the liberals tell us that we've all been on the wrong side of history, those of us who don't buy into the liberal story. Because where we are today is in an age of identity politics. And where does that come from? That comes from the new left and the new right. Because what the new left did, certainly the second generation of which Telos isn't really a part, is it took socialism in a very doctrinaire direction. And that made socialism either sort of rationalist and scientific or culturally liberationist, but either way totally abstract and soulless. Because that sort of new left always preferred progress to tradition, identity to class, and free choice to inheritance or common purpose. Now, what that really means in the end is that that new left is not radical at all. It becomes utterly conformist. It becomes pro-capitalism, pro-liberalism, pro-secularism. It becomes all the things that I think are dissolving in front of our eyes. But the new right, which in some sense is the opposite new left, but also its mirror image, is really no better. Because much of the new right essentially combines a libertarian economics with a sort of corporate capture of the state. Which means what? Which means that the new right ends up aligning conservatism with borderless capitalism, with the fundamentalist faith, and with individual freedom devoid of any mutual obligation. So it's not really conservative at all, because its embrace of the global free market as the main mode of social organization means that it now undermines community cohesion and the family, which it always purported to uphold. So neither the new left nor the new right can really address where we are today. We are in an age of anger, an age of profound economic and cultural insecurity. And I would say that Telos is so interesting because it's always stepped outside of these new left and new right paradigms. Why? Because Telos from the outset had a critique not just of totalitarianism, which it did share with others on the new left, but in fact very quickly of Marxism itself, and then, of course, of liberalism. Now, you might say, well, where does that leave it? Well, it leaves it in a very interesting space, because what do Marxism and liberalism have in common? Well, something very important, which is they're both failed materialist metaphysics. They're both saying there's no importance other than just socioeconomic forces. That's what determines everything. And, ideas are just the sort of superstructure, they're just the sort of ideology that really doesn't matter. But Telos is so interesting because it's not an idealism either. It doesn't go back to Kant or Hegel or any of the great idealist heroes. Not at all. What it does do precisely is to question the really underlying logic, and that is, of course, that of secularism. Because what liberalism and Marxism and all of these ideologies have in common is they're all profoundly secular. But they're not secular as opposed to religious. They're secular in an even more fundamental sense, which is that the secular is now everything that determines even what the religious means. And so Telos, because it's anti-totalitarian in a really radical sense, rejects a kind of totalizing secular logic. It basically says there are things that are sacred, and it's not up to any force to determine what is sacred and what isn't. The sacred, in some sense, is the most fundamentally given reality. It's labor, it's land, it's life. And that kind of sanctity is something you could say you can agree with anthropologically, even if you're not of faith. And so this kind of space is really a space of a post-secular political theology, and David's already mentioned how important that is. And if you think of all the themes running through Telos, culture, tradition, federal populism, right? All the elites and the new classes and so on and so forth. This is not just stuff that was relevant 20 or 30 years ago, it's now. And it's, I would say, in the years to come. So in conclusion, it's really because Telos creates a space where you don't buy into all the conventional categories of left and right and state and market and individual and collective and all the binaries that have really dissolved. And also doesn't accept new binaries like elite versus people, or globalism versus nationalism or nativism. You know, it rejects all the binary logics because it always understands that this is a reductive account of reality. And so this space is really one where, you know, really interesting traditions can come into conversation, engagement with one another. Paleo-conservatism, ethical socialism, they're the real interesting traditions, and Telos provides a space for their engagement. And that's why I think it will matter not just today on this wonderful anniversary, but also for many years and decades to come. Thank you very much.